The questions can be entered into the chat box in Zoom today, and we'll do our best to field these as time permits. The chat function can be located on the bottom navigation bar in Zoom. We really value your input and comments. We actively use this information to better shape administrative rules to meet your needs, so please continue to be engaged throughout the process. Comments can be submitted to Commerce using the form that we have posted on our webpage, and I think one of our staff members is going to paste a link in the chat to that comment form here in Zoom. Next slide, please. Commerce's mission is to strengthen communities, and we do this through a broad range of policy and programs, including housing and homelessness, business assistance, community services, and energy, which is where our work is situated within the State Energy Office. Next slide, please. So this is the agenda for this morning's workshop. We're getting started here at 10, and then we're going to work to promptly wrap up by noon with a break in the middle. We're going to be providing a brief summary of comments that we've received to date. We're going to do a recap of the elements of House Bill 1390. We're going to spend quite a bit of time talking about the interaction of House Bill 1390 and district energy system decarbonization plans and what that means for clean buildings compliance. We're going to talk a bit about the timeline for energy management plans and operations and maintenance programs as well. And Annalyn's going to spend a bit of time talking about case studies and resources. Again, we'll try to leave time for questions and answers and work to wrap up by 12 o'clock noon. Next slide, please. I wanted to provide just real brief introductions to our rulemaking team this morning. So my name is Emily Salzberg, and I'm the Managing Director of our Buildings team here within the State Energy Office at Department of Commerce. Our team oversees a very broad range of codes, standards, and programs focused on the built environment. We've got incredible policy support with Liz Reichart and Nick Manning. We have a growing technical team. You're going to hear from Luke Howard, Judy Darst, and Donnie Westfall today. And we have, again, a growing staff helping to support our programmatic work, including Annalyn Bergen, James Witherington, Aletha McGee, and a number of other staff as well. So I just want to acknowledge and thank everybody for their hard work. Next slide, please. So I wanted to take a quick step back and briefly talk about the role of buildings in the state's greenhouse gas emissions, kind of the why with why we're all here. Buildings have a profound impact on the environment and carbon emissions. The building sector is the state's largest carbon polluter, second only to transportation. What's important to note, though, is the building sector is where we have the fastest growing emissions due to population growth and increase here in Washington State, in addition to other factors as well. Existing buildings and district energy systems create unique challenges and opportunities as the state works to meet its greenhouse gas emissions limits and statute. The 2021 State Energy Strategy determined that investment in building energy efficiency paired with electrification is the state's least cost pathway to significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the building sector. And next, I'm going to pass it to Liz to talk about our rulemaking process.
Great. Thank you, Emily, and good morning. This is a look at the rulemaking process for those of you who may be joining a state rulemaking for the first time. The CR 101 is the first step. That's when the state files paperwork to open the process and indicate that we'd like to start amending our rules. And we filed this last November. We'll then host 3 to 4 workshops, which you're in right now. You're in the right place to get everyone familiar with the contents of the bill and have an opportunity to discuss important questions that need to be settled in rule with the public. We will then file those proposed rules as the CR 102. The public then has a little bit over a month to digest those rules and submit public comment to let us know what they like change in rule text. We'll then have a public hearing during this month to collect additional comments and suggestions. And then finally, we will adopt final rules for the implementation of House Bill 1390. And this is a look at our rulemaking schedule, which encompasses all of the steps I just described. We'll tackle different technical topics at each of the workshops. We kicked off our rulemaking in January and provided an introduction to the legislation. Our workshop 2 in February focused on developing out the rules to implement 1390. And finally, we're planning a couple workshops in March, including a cumulative review before developing draft rules in April and final rules in May and June. Thank you, Judy, for putting that registration link to our second March workshop into the chat. And I will say this is the timeline we're aiming for, but I think I speak for the team when I say we would rather get these rules clear and correct rather than rush them. So the timeline may expand or change slightly as additional workshops and events are added. And then this is the cycle of public comments during the workshop phase. So after every workshop, draft rules will be emailed to registrants and later posted to the website as soon as possible. We will give 2 weeks to comment on draft rule text, and we'll then summarize feedback at the subsequent workshop where this process repeats itself. We only ask that participants in our workshops be respectful and use the chats or comment forms to provide feedback. Our goal is for these rules to be a reflection of our work here together, and our rules will only benefit from these workshops being inclusive and participatory. So we just ask that everyone be respectful and show good manners in this virtual environment. And speaking of summary of previous comments, I'm going to hand it over to Donnie Westfall to summarize what we've heard.
Thanks, Liz. Next slide, please. All right, so we received a few public comments after the last workshop. We had general requests for clarification and suggestions on policy, such as seeking clarity regarding energy metering for calculating a campus EUI, suggested alignment with Seattle BEPS definitions and policy with regards to decarbonization, and considerations for maintaining EMP lighting schedule exceptions for campuses with approved decarb plans that will meet their EUIT. We also received a comment encouraging the development and expansion of district energy systems through increased public-private sector partnerships to better justify substantial economic investments and to help build out the decarbonized system infrastructure. Next slide, thank you. And finally, we had a few comments regarding just integration of the decarbonization plans with the clean building standard itself, including clarification on integrating decarb plan timeframes with the clean building standard compliance timeframes, clarification regarding investment criteria requirements for campuses with buildings that don't have an EUIT and are decarbonizing through the district system, and then clarification regarding facilities that are currently engaged in ongoing renovations and construction projects and whether or not they can utilize existing building and energy analyses in lieu of level 2 audits for compliance with their decarb plans and the investment criteria of the clean building standard. Next slide. So before we get into today's proposed rules, we'll do a quick recap of the 1390 legislation. Next slide. So the legislation focuses on state campus district energy systems and their requirement to develop and implement a decarbonization plan. House Bill 1390 also identifies and defines campus district energy systems and gives them the ability to opt into the decarbonization plan requirements. State campus district energy systems are defined as having 5 or more buildings with over 100,000 combined square feet of conditioned space that's connected to the district system and is owned by either the state of Washington or a public-private partnership that includes 1 public buildings owner and 1 private entity. Campus district energy systems are defined as having 3 or more buildings with over 100,000 combined square feet of conditioned space connected to the district energy system and are owned by a single entity, a public-private partnership with a private owner of the district system and a public buildings owner, or 2 private entities, 1 owning the district system and 1 private owner of the buildings connected to that system. Next slide. So House Bill 1390 legislation requires owners of state campus district energy systems to develop a decarbonization plan that provides a strategy for up to 15 years for the state campus district energy system to decarbonize. The Department of Commerce may approve a decarbonization plan with a time frame longer than 15 years. The legislation requires the inclusion of the following in the decarb plans. So mechanisms to replace fossil fuels in the heating plants, an evaluation of options to partner with nearby sources and uses of waste heat and cooling, an examination of opportunities to expand the footprint served by the decarbonized district system, and a plan that includes meeting the energy use intensity of the campus served by the district system. Next slide. In addition to the mandatory requirements, the legislation also encourages consideration of including the following in the decarbonization plans. Distribution network upgrades, on-site storage facilities, space cooling for residential facilities, labor and workforce development considerations, public-private partnership opportunities, and incorporation of industrial symbiosis projects. Next slide. Thank you. The decarbonization plan is a pathway to compliance with the Clean Building Standard so long as the following conditions are met. The approved decarb plan must include a pathway for complying with the performance metric of the Clean Building Standard at the time that the plan is fully implemented. So this can mean either meeting the energy use intensity for the campus or complying through the investment criteria pathway. Additionally, the energy management plan and an operations and maintenance program must be implemented in accordance with the standard in all campus buildings connected to that district's energy system, regardless of whether they are covered buildings or not. Phased implementation may also be employed by the decarbonization plan, which allows for delayed implementation of any required energy efficiency measures that are not beyond their useful life. All right, next I'm going to pass to Judy Darst to discuss rule integration.
Thanks, Donnie. This is a breakdown of the Clean Buildings Performance Standard by section. The standard is comprised of ASHRAE Standard 100 with state amendments in WAC 19450. The February 2024 version, I just posted a link in the chat of the integrated document, can be downloaded through our Clean Buildings website. And this new version does include the Tier 2 requirements. After we complete the District Energy System Decarbonization Plan rulemaking that we're currently working on, we will revise this integrated standard and again, make it available for download. Next slide. I'm going to talk a little bit about the decarbonization plans and complying with the Clean Buildings Performance Standard. Next slide. A qualified person is required for compliance of Tier 1 covered buildings. They are responsible to benchmark using the Energy Star Portfolio Manager, establish the target, or determine that they will pursue the investment criteria, develop and implement the EMP and O&M program, and then either meet the target or comply with the investment criteria. Next slide. An approved decarbonization plan extends the Tier 1 and Tier 2 covered buildings compliance deadline. If a decarbonization plan is not submitted or approved, Tier 1 and Tier 2 buildings may face penalties on their respective compliance date. For the EMP and O&M, they're expected to follow the compliance schedules. For Tier 1 covered buildings, it's June 1, 26, 27, or 28, depending on the cohort and size of the building. And for Tier 2 covered buildings, July 1, 2027. And then for the buildings not covered, but connected to the district energy system, we're looking at 2030 compliance date. So only one EMP is required for the whole campus. So it is possible to revise this one plan when there are varied building sizes on campus. Now I'll hand it off to Luke for more on campuses.
Great, thank you, Judy. We are just flying through the itinerary today. Do we have any questions that could be answered at this point?
No questions at this time.
Okay, there was one clarification question from Mary regarding whether the decarbonization requirements of 1390 are required of just state buildings, and that is correct. So any campus as defined by the standard that's owned by the state, so that would be campus is defined as a district energy system connected to 5 buildings or more, the total square footage of 100,000 square feet or more. Those campuses would be required to comply with the rules that we're developing currently for 1390. Opting in would include any publicly owned or privately owned campuses containing 3 buildings or more with a total aggregate of 100,000 square feet or more.
Luke,
Okay.
before we did get one question just now. Um,
Okay.
We assume the O&M and EMPs for the existing conditions of the campus, correct? Typically, an O&M is produced at time of construction complete, not design completion. Provide some clarity on that.
Yeah, so the intent is that the energy management plan and operations and maintenance program requirements of the standard, Clean Building Performance Standard, be implemented at a campus level. The implementation of the EMP and O&M is to be scheduled based on the original compliance dates for Tier 1 buildings, Tier 2 buildings. So that would be 2026 for the buildings 220,000 square feet or greater, 2027 for buildings in the middle cohort and Tier 2 buildings, and then 2028 for the smallest cohort of Tier 1 buildings. That would be the buildings between 50,000 square feet and 90,000 square feet. All remaining buildings on a campus that are compliant through the decarbonization plan would need to have the EMP and O&M implemented by the 2030 date. Now, if there are elements of the EMP and O&M program that change over time as you implement the requirements of the standard, including the decarbonization plan, they need to be implemented. The EMP and the O&M need to be updated as those new features or changes in features occur. I hope that answers the question. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through the slideshow. So what I've got displayed on the screen right now is kind of a simple graphic depicting how to create a energy use intensity target for a campus. So as many of you may know, ASHRAE Standard 100 is based on building-centric energy use intensity target development. When we are creating a target for a group of buildings, we want to do that as an area-weighted average for that group. You want to create the energy use intensity target for each individual building first, and then you create the area-weighted average from that. So the graphic kind of shows the buildings that are defined as a campus. So you can see they're all connected to that district heating and or cooling system. So within the context of the standard, that's how we define a campus. We first create that EUIT for the individual buildings, and then we do the area-weighted average EUIT. The 2 buildings without names or numbers may be on the property, but since they are not connected to the district energy system, they are not considered a campus in the eyes of 1390 and would not be included in that energy use intensity target in terms of the decarbonization plan and House Bill 1390. Any exempt buildings would not be included, and any buildings that have spaces without targets need to be considered in context of the requirements of section 7.2.3. If you have spaces without a target, there's 2 ways to pursue Clean Building Performance Standard compliance, either by submetering out those spaces without targets and complying through the exemptions to section 7.2.3, If a building is over 50% of a building does not have a target, that building would need to be sub-metered out and excluded from the campus level target building. If it is not sub-metered out, then the campus would need to comply not through the energy use intensity target, but through the investment criteria of the standard. Next slide.
Luke, real quick,
Yeah.
I got a couple questions on that topic. First one is, if you have several buildings without sub-metering and a common utility feed, how do you calculate the individual EUI and EUIT?
So if you have a common feed, now well, let's break this apart a little bit. When we're creating the energy use intensity target, the metering doesn't really matter, right? Because we're just creating the target for the buildings. However, if you want to jump to the next slide, I'll talk about how to develop the EUI. So developing the EUI for a campus, you need to have the metering needs to be appropriate to measure energy use intensity for that subset of buildings. So any buildings that are connected to that district energy system needs to be metered in a way that you're not measuring, you're able to isolate that group of buildings from whatever metering configuration you have. So if your plan is to comply with 1390 through the EUIT, then you would need to assure that your metering is set up in a way that you can isolate that group of buildings that are connected to the district energy system from any other meters that may be serving other buildings. If you choose not to or cannot, the investment criteria is the pathway. So investment criteria requires level 2 energy audits in all of the tier 1 buildings, and then a life cycle cost analysis of all of those identified energy efficiency measures and implementation of those cost-effective measures. That's the roundabout way to get to comply with the Clean Building Performance Standard without being able to measure UI.
Thanks, Luke. We have a few more if you want to take those now, or we can.
Yeah, if it's appropriate timing for that, I won't take them.
Okay. Does the plant building itself also require being treated as a building for EEMs, or is its focus the heating system and not the building encasing it?
Yeah, why don't we jump up to the slide above? We have the graphic here. So if creating when creating the target for campus level EUIT compliance, the most appropriate way, if the district heating system is essentially not part of a building, it's an isolated or standalone building, that building's GFA should be associated with the mix of buildings that do have an energy use intensity target. So let's say we have this portion of buildings here. We've got 6 buildings that are connected to the district energy system. Those 6 buildings have different floor areas. You can see in my table there, I have the GFA ratios. So whatever the GFA of that district heating and or cooling system building is, assuming it does not have a target itself, can be distributed to the different buildings based on the ratio of their floor area. So let's say the first one, it says 13%, building A contains 13% of the total GFA of the campus. Then 13% of that district heating and or cooling system building, that GFA would be added to the GFA of building A. If you think about it this way, every standalone building is going to have a mechanical room with heating and or cooling systems in it. So it's just a way of proportioning that district's heating and or cooling mechanical room to that building. I think there's a second part of the question, Donnie.
I mean, I think that answers it. There's the next question though is on a related note. So what if the chiller or boiler plant is located within a building on campus? Should that be just part of that EUIT, or should that section? How do you handle that space?
We would just include that into the GFA and the EUIT for that building.
Okay.
And just so everybody knows, there will be detailed guidance released by Commerce prior to or post rulemaking. Once we have the final rules made, we'll have those details outlined in a guidance document.
All right, we got two more. Are you still good?
Yep.
Okay. Would you also expect draws such as street lighting or EVSE not attached to a building to be submetered?
There are certain provisions within the standard currently that allow for end use deductions in certain situations. For example, electric vehicle, charging stations can be deducted from the energy use consumption of the campus or the building. So that would not be included in the EUI. Billboards. Generally, any lighting attached to a building or surface parking lighting would be included in the EUI. I guess section, Donnie, correct me if I'm wrong, but section 5.2 of the standard outlines the qualified deductions.
Yep.
Thank you. If you think about it, the energy use intensity targets were developed based on CBEX and CBSA, so regional and national data surveys for buildings. Those surveys included energy use and consumption related to lighting, surface parking lighting, for example, exterior lighting on buildings, etc. But there are the deductions that we have listed in 5.2 are kind of the deductions that are less common in terms of electrical vehicle charging. It's becoming more common, but we still, since the source data didn't really include that, we don't need that to be reflected in the EUI of the building or the campus.
All right, we've got quite a few coming in. Maybe we can pause on the questions and keep going with the presentation, and we can circle back during the Q&A.
Okay, great. Once we go up one more, make sure we covered that. So mention if campus EUI should include all sources of energy imported into the buildings connected to the district energy system. So we're treating it just like we're creating the EUI at the building level. However, one of the differences is we are to measure the energy going into the district energy system heating plant rather than the energy leaving the plant and going to the building. So if you have, and this is important, if you have a district energy system that is decarbonizing, let's say you have a heat pump that's going to be the new heating plant, and it's got an efficiency of COP of 2 or 3. We want to make sure that we are reflecting the efficiency of that heating plant in the development of the EUI of the building. If we measure the output of the system, we are including the quote unquote free heat that we're getting from either the water source or the air source, whatever's the heat pump is run by. If the campus and the decarbonization plan is using energy recovery, such as heat recovery chillers, we're sharing waste heat throughout the campus. If the waste heat is only going to buildings within a single ownership, that reduces the energy use intensity of the building or the buildings on the campus. You're kind of sharing the heat from building to building. If any of that waste heat is exported off the campus to adjoining or adjacent buildings not owned by or not part of that specific campus, then that waste heat, if you want to gain credit for it, needs to be measured in meter. And then again, the last bullet here, much like the current requirements for creating the EUI, any exported energy produced on site can be deducted from the energy use intensity for the campus. Next slide. Okay, a little bit of a timeline here. So June of 2024 is when campuses, state campuses need to notify Commerce that they are starting their plans. Any campuses, private campuses opting in need to notify Commerce that they're starting their plan. June of 2025, final plans are due. The energy management plan operations and maintenance programs need to be implemented on tier 1 buildings over 220,000 square feet by June of 2026. For buildings between 90 and 220,000, the EMP and O&M needs to be implemented to those buildings by June of 27, June of 2028 for that smallest tier 1 cohort. And I didn't mention June of 2027 will also be the EMP and O&M dates for tier 2 buildings, which are the buildings between 20 and 50,000 square feet. Progress reporting would start on June of 2030 for these decarbonization plans, and that's when you also need to have the remaining buildings on the campus have the EMP and O&M implemented in them. So these are buildings less than 20,000 square feet. And then moving forward, we have progress reporting on a 5-year cycle, starting in 2030, 2035, 2040, until the completion of the decarbonization plan. And then final compliance or completion reporting will be required. Next slide. Okay, so we talked about June of this year, 2024. Commerce needs to get notification that these state campuses are starting their decarbonization plans. Any private campuses that want to opt into compliance through the decarbonization plan need to notify Commerce as well. So we'll be asking for information such as building names and GFAs, addresses, parcel numbers, Commerce, building IDs where applicable. So we've already created building IDs for tier 1 buildings to include those. We are going to have a smart sheet, likely a smart sheet format to do that. So those that process will be announced within our Clean Buildings Bulletin. Next slide. Okay, so final plans, as noted, are due June of 2025. That decarbonization plan will be a building improvement plan. It will be contain all the specific details. We will also require you to submit what we're calling Form K. We're going to review Form K here in a little bit, but that's going to summarize the requirements of the decarbonization plan. You can kind of think of it as a checklist to help. It can help guide you through that decarbonization planning. Make sure you have all elements that are required by the law in that plan. It also, when you report it to Commerce, it gives us a good summary for us to kind of give a peripheral review of that full decarbonization plan. So maybe I'll take a few questions now, if there's some appropriate questions, Donnie. After that, I actually want to share my screen and give you all a look at our outline for this Form K decarbonization plan.
Yeah, we've got one question related to kind of notifying the Commerce on starting the plans, and then there's a handful still related to kind of calculating that EUIT or the EUI for the campus. You want to take all those now, or just kind of focus on?
Yeah, I'm okay taking those now. I think it's appropriate enough. I think we have plenty of time.
Okay, let's start with just the notification one. Will there be any grace period to notify for notifying to opt into Annex W pathway? Current draft of Annex W cites that the AHJ should be notified. Should Department of Commerce be notified instead?
The AHJ is technically Department of Commerce, and that's outlined within the existing clean building requirements integrated standard. Grace period, we haven't really developed a grace period, but if you have any specific comments that you would want to submit to us, that will help guide that direction for us.
Perfect. All right, we're going to loop back to some of these questions about the EUI and UIT. So what if a building is not connected to all the energy loops on a campus, such as a building not connected to the steam loop?
Okay, so the definition of campus is it's got to be connected to the district energy system. The building. So if you have 5 or more for state campus, it's 5 or more. For private campuses, it's 3 or more. If you have those conditions, so you have 5 or more or 3 or more connected to the district energy system, then your state building, you have to submit a decarbonization plan. You know, the total aggregate square footage needs to be at least 100,000 square feet. If you have, for example, a campus that meets those requirements, so you got 5 or more buildings over 100,000 square feet connected to the district energy system, which the district energy system is heating and or cooling. So let's say it's a cooling system connecting 5 or more buildings over 100,000 square feet, and the steam system only connects 4 buildings. You would still need to create the decarbonization plan because you technically meet the definition of campus, state campus. You need to only need to decarbonize that heating system, so the steam system. So when creating a target for that campus, technically you would still need to include the building that is not connected to the steam system if it's still connected to the district heating and or cooling system. If you have any specific comments or arguments contrary to that, we would love to hear them.
Great, thanks. Next one, how would we calculate an EUIT for a building with a large chiller boiler plant located within?
Yeah, I think I might have already commented on that. As far
I
as
think you did.
yeah, if you have any further comments, you know, I kind of see where this question is coming from. If you have maybe a district plan that contains more than 50% of the building, or maybe close to 50, a large proportion of the building, it may be appropriate to disaggregate that GFA throughout the connected buildings relative to the ratio of total GFA of each of those buildings, kind of how I outlined earlier. We'll have to take a closer look at that and see what the impact on the energy use intensity target is. We want to be equitable about this. So if you have a case for that that makes sense, we're certainly willing to get a better understanding of that and provide that in our guidance documents.
Great, thanks, Lee. How should we handle buildings that should be sub-metered but aren't and won't be in time to calculate a clean EUI?
So the decarbonization plans give participating campuses an opportunity. They give you 15 plus years to implement that decarbonization plan. So if the energy use intensity target is the optimal or desired pathway to clean building performance standard compliance, hopefully part of the decarbonization plan is to install the appropriate meters so that you can measure an EUI for the campus itself. If that's not part of the decarbonization plan, the investment criteria is still a pathway available for clean building performance standard compliance. Again, that would require a level 2 energy audit and a life cycle cost analysis on all those tier 1 buildings.
Great, thanks. Next one is just confirming we can continue to use education, college, university, EUIT for university campuses.
Yeah, college, university, energy use intensity targets based on that building activity type can be used on campuses. If there are any buildings on that campus that are outside the scope of the or the definition of college university, they can then do a area weighted energy use intensity target for that campus. So let's say we have an office building connected to that district energy system that really has nothing to do with the college itself. That target for that campus would need to include that area weighted corporation for that office building.
Okay. What about hours of operation? So if the operating shift normalization factor, should all academic spaces assume 8 to 5, including labs, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m.?
So the shift normalization factors when creating an energy use intensity target can be adjusted. Let's say we have a laboratory that runs 24/7. There are certain opportunities allowable within the current structure of the standard that allow you to disaggregate that GFA associated with those building activity types in order to create a area weighted target that represents the shift normalization factor for that space. So, for example, carry that example a little further. Let's see if I.
Hey, Luke, this is Delano Palmer with Central Washington University. I was the one that posed that question, because this does go to the building operating shift normalization factor found at the bottom of the EUI target table. A lot of the institution, and I think a lot of my peers have this, there are some buildings that have flex hours, whether they are more administrative or even labs, depending on the season, those kinds of things. So you had a good example of that EULT target calculation a couple slides back. So I'm not sure if any of that information had a building operating shift normalization factor, but an example of that would be very helpful, especially for, say, a lab space that works some odd hours during academic years and then maybe is offline for most of summer, or administration buildings that may have flexible hours during the summer that might go 60 hours a week as opposed to 40.
Yeah, a lot of that's going to have to be a case-to-case situation that we'll have to give specific guidance on. It's all within the standard, but we might need to provide some examples for you specific to certain cases. For the most part, it's all based on the average annual weekly operation. So it's annualized over a 12-month period. So, for example, like a K-12 school, they may operate, for 9 months, more than 50 hours a week. But if you include the summertime, their annual average is less than 50 hours a week. So in those cases, you would just need to use the shift normalization factor that's less than 50 hours or less than 51 hours a week.
Okay.
You may have, though, a gymnasium in that K-12 school that is open more on average more than 50 hours a week because they do community events and sporting activities after hours. So it's operated during the school day by the school, and then after hours, it's athletic and community events. So you could disaggregate that gym GFA and create a different energy use intensity target based on that adjusted shift normalization factor. So, Delano, we can certainly speak more about this in detail afterwards, but there are provisions within the standard in many cases to disaggregate those varied shift normalization.
Thank you, Luke.
Yep.
All right, we got 3 more questions. You want to take those now?
Yeah, let's go ahead and do it.
Okay. About how much funding is allocated for development of decarbonization plans for state campuses with district energy systems?
That's a great question. That funding is not through Commerce, so I don't have an answer for you. I don't know if anybody else on the team here at Commerce has any better information than me.
Yeah, Luke, only thing to add, and Liz pipe in, but it's our understanding that the publicly owned entities requested funding from the legislature to complete those decarbonization plans, and it's our understanding that those have been funded. But yeah, Liz, jump in if there's anything you want to add.
All right, hearing nothing, we can move on to the next one. Wanting to clarify, for a 100,000 square foot building on the campus that is not presently connected, but we intend to connect in the next 10 years, can that building be considered part of the decarbonization plan pathway, or do they need to go down the individual building compliance pathway until it is connected to the central plant?
Yeah, if the decarbonization plan does include that building, it doesn't need to be currently connected. So you certainly want to include it in the energy use intensity compliance pathway or the investment criteria pathway. Again, participating campuses in the decarbonization plan are allowed 15 plus years to not only implement the decarbonization of the heating plant, but to obtain final clean building performance standard compliance.
All right, thank you. And then this one is just an add-on to a question from before, but to clarify, if you have a loop that serves less than 4 buildings, that system does not need to be included in the decarbonization plan pathway for state district energy systems.
Correct. If the district energy system, which includes cooling, right? Cooling, heating, does not serve 5 buildings or more with a total aggregate of 100,000 square feet. You are not required by 1390 to participate in the decarbonization of that heating plant.
That's it for now. Thanks,
Great.
Luke.
Okay, so Annalyn, can you give me ability to share my screen? I'll see if I can.
Got it.
Thank you. Okay. Can I get
I see your document.
information? So this is our outline for Form K. And again, Form K is kind of what we're going to be requiring along with the decarbonization plan June of 2025. So when you submit your final decarbonization plan, we're going to want Form K to be filled out as well. It's likely it's going to be developed through and submitted through our data portal. So this is kind of our draft outline. We would love to have comment on this. So you'll see Judy put in the chat a link to this document. Please feel free to mark it up and send it back to us with track changes so that we can deliberate on your comments and suggestions. So let's just walk through it quickly here. Decarbonization project scope of work. So we're going to want a summary of the existing system, including the campus layout, buildings connected to it, and current campus benchmarking. The benchmarking would include where, what is your campus EUIT and what is your current campus EUI. We're going to want to see the proposed design, including the buildings connected. If there's any new buildings connected, we want to see that. The projected annual energy use intensity. So this will help evaluate how you get to your energy use intensity target. It may be that just decarbonizing the heating system is enough to get that campus to its target, below the target. And any evaluation of using waste heat, and again, extending the system to other buildings. We want to know about the metering configuration to support informing the optimal energy management of the district system and of the campus itself. So this is where it would be important if you want to seek the energy use intensity target. You want to make sure that the campus is metered appropriately to do so. So again, metering needs to support campus energy use intensity, a measurement of campus energy use intensity if that's the pathway that you plan to pursue for clean building performance standard compliance. We're going to want to know what the district energy system heating plant design load is and what that plant's design capacity is. So what is the load of the campus that it's serving? And we want to make sure that its design capacity it meets at least 100% of that load. We want to know about any heating plant backup or supplemental heating source and capacity, and then projected annual consumption for that backup or supplemental heating source. Currently, we do have a provision within the rules that were proposed and presented last workshop that would allow in certain cases decommissioning of the heating plant if it was proved that the decommissioning and decentralizing of the heating system for that campus is more cost effective and saves more energy than decarbonizing of that district heating plant. This would take level 2 energy audit, campus, and a life cycle cost analysis at minimum. We're going to want to see an evaluation of opportunities to utilize waste heat and cooling, and an examination of opportunities to expand the decarbonization system to adjacent buildings. So some of this is a little bit repetitive from above. Go ahead.
And Luke, real quick.
Yeah.
I believe the C and D there were supposed to be, or those sub bullets in terms of how those are accounted for with the proposal to decommission the central plant.
Oh, yes. Thank you.
Yep.
Keep that in mind when you're reviewing, because you already had that document. We can send out a revised document here. Just going to mark that up, and we can send out a revised document afterward. Okay, so the performance metrics. So we're going to want to see in Form K compliance with the EYT or investment criteria. So what is your pathway to clean building performance standard compliance? Form D, documenting any required energy efficiency measures. So the decarbonization plan needs to show that if it's just decarbonization of the heating plant that'll get you to the target, we just need to see that. But if there's any energy efficiency measures required on the individual buildings, we need to see Form D, which is the energy audit template that's currently required of the standard when energy efficiency measures are required to meet the standard. Form F is that life cycle cost analysis that would be required if you're complying through the investment criteria. The energy management plan operations and maintenance program implementation. We want to see a timeline of the implementation in your decarbonization plan and on Form K. So that will include that schedule of when those features need to be implemented on the buildings based on their building size. Again, we talked about 2026 for the largest buildings and on down the line. Next, we have a list of the recommended district energy system decarbonization plan considerations. So within the decarbonization plan, we want to see you consider have some narrative of your evaluation of distribution network upgrades, on-site energy storage facilities, so space and cooling for residential facilities, labor and workforce, and options for the public-private partnerships, and so on. So these are specific items outlined in House Bill 1390 legislation. And then utility engagement. We want to make sure that within the decarbonization plan, you've engaged with the utilities that are currently serving the campus, or if you're bringing on new utilities, that you've engaged with those utility companies. Again, this is Form K, which is a checklist for the decarbonization plan, the final decarbonization plan. So this would be due in June of 2025, when the final decarbonization plan is due. So this is just a form that's submitted with your decarb plan. And you can use it as kind of a checklist to assure you that you're covering all the bases. So when the decarbonization plan is reviewed, you have some assurance that you've covered all the bases. So other considerations, communication and engagement. Again, we talked about utilities, but also, how is this plan going to affect the occupants of the buildings, funders, maybe even the public, right? How is that going to affect the public? What kind of communication and engagement have you approached with the affected parties or neighbors? Are there funding mechanisms in place? We don't need to know what those are, but we want to know whether you have considered the funding mechanisms and the projections of costs as well. So Form K is not just for the submittal of our initial final decarb plans, but it's also going to be used when we do progress reporting on 5-year increments. So we're going to want to see any updates to the decarb plan. So we have itemized here, what are the current or updated estimated costs? What are your current expended costs? So where are you at? Some of these questions apply more to that 5-year progress reporting cycle. We're going to use the same form for that. So if you can think of anything else that you think should be in that progress report, feel free to comment. If there are any changes needed to be made to the decarbonization plan because of updated, evolving codes, laws, and other standards, such as, we are likely to be rationing down energy use intensity targets over time. So you're going to have to revisit that decarbonization plan to make sure you're still required time out in the future. Remember, these decarb plans have a 15+ year timeline, so these considerations are important. So we're also going to want to see proposed project timelines, so scheduled timelines for implementation of the energy management plan and operations and maintenance program we've already talked about. Scheduled time for implementation of the required energy efficiency measures, if there are any required in order to meet the energy use intensity target or the investment criteria requirements. And then a scheduled timeline for implementation of all phases of the district energy system heating plan decarbonization. So this decarbonization plan needs to have that scheduled out in sequence. So, it's understood that timelines have been evaluated during the decarbonization planning. That's it for the outline for Form K. Again, please share with us any comments you may have.
Luke, do you want me to start presenting the
Please do.
presentation again? Okay. Do you see the presentation?
I can, thank you.
We see
Okay.
it with the next slide as well. And on.
Yeah, you do this.
I'm sorry, what are you seeing?
We're seeing the next slide as well, version.
We want presentation view.
Let's try this again.
There's Judy in a crawl space.
Now we're seeing box.
All right, everyone.
Donnie, are there any specific questions at this time that we can?
There you go.
Yeah, we got a couple. First one is, when does Commerce plan to release the long-term EUIT drawdown so that we can plan for meeting that at the end of the implementation?
Yeah, so Commerce is charged to evaluate the energy use intensity targets in 2029, I believe. So by 2030, we'll have any updates to the energy use intensity targets at that point. Ideally, we will have some projected target setting for each 5-year cycle after that. Emily, I'm not sure if you have any corrections or comments to add.
No, Luke, you got that? Yeah, next rulemaking in 2029, we'll address targets at that point and then work to create some predictability in future compliance cycles at that point.
Great, thank you.
Hey, Luke, we're kind of past the top of the hour. You want to take a break before we dive into the next part of this?
That would be great.
Okay, it is 11:09. Let's take a 6-minute break to 11:15.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm gonna pause the recording.
All right, welcome back, everybody. So we just went over the detailed look at the Form K proposal outlined for the decarbonization plan. Again, this form would be required when submitting the final decarbonization plan in June of 2025. It will also be required when submitting the decarbonization plan at the 5-year progress reporting timelines. Next slide.
Hey, Luke,
Uh-huh.
we had one more question just on Form K before we
Sure.
get moving forward. What should be included in the current expended costs? Is this just the cost to prepare the decarbonization plan?
So the current costs in the final decarbonization plan would be the cost of implementation of the plan. So any energy efficiency measures required to meet clean building performance standard, as well as the cost of decarbonizing the heating plant and any associated costs with that. For example, if you're converting from a steam system to a 4-pipe hot water system, those costs as well.
But on those initial submittal of Form K, what sort of things should be included under that category?
So the initial Form K will be including the estimate costs for the total decarbon.
Well, expended costs. So are we looking for just costs to prepare these decarbonization plans
No, it's
specific to capital investments?
yeah, you know, we're not interested in what it costs to make the plan, but all the capital investments involved in decarbonizing the heating plant and meeting the clean buildings performance standard. So this would be just estimates, preliminary estimates. You know, that will evolve over time. So we imagine in the progress reporting, we'll have different numbers.
Great, thank you.
Hey, Luke, this is Phil. I asked that question. Just one more thing. I know you had a button in there for projected costs, which I could see as being all those things you just described, but then one for the current expended. And so is that like if we have already started some of those energy efficiency measures or decarb efforts that you want those costs captured at like to date, or that's where it was
Oh,
unclear.
okay, yeah, no, that would be for the progress reporting. It would just be the expenditures to date from when the initial decarb plan was submitted in 2025. And then if it's a progress report in 2030, which is like, well, what have you implemented in that 5-year span, and what were those costs?
Got it. My bad. I missed the progress piece. Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, sorry about that. This form will be utilized not just in that initial final decarb plan submittal, but also in the progress report. Okay, so here's a list of our proposed compliance forms when complying with Clean Building Performance Standard through House Bill 1390, the decarbonization plan. So we're going to have Form J, which is essentially just our modified Form A to kind of represent a campus level compliance pathway. And then, so that's just kind of your attestation, and there's some data metrics that are documented on that form as well. Form K, we just discussed ad nauseum, so we don't need to go into more detail about that. Form B, C, D, F are existing forms within the standard. B is just your energy use intensity target. That is incorporated into our data portal, so you develop your target within the portal. Just so you know, we will be needing to update our portal to handle campus level energy use intensity target development. We're doing that currently. Form B is not going to be required for quite some time yet, so don't worry about that. Form C is the Energy Star Portfolio Manager account, accounting for the energy use intensity and then whether normalized energy use intensity of the target. We will have guidance out there for how Energy Star Portfolio Manager needs to reflect campuses. So kind of a parent-child relationships between the campus and the associated buildings. Form D is going to be required only when a energy audit is required as a standard, and then Form F is only required when pursuing the investment criteria of the standard. Next slide. Progress reporting, we talked about that already, but here's just a slide kind of representing it. It's going to be that revised decarbonization plan. Remember, progress reporting is due every 5 years once a decarbonization plan is approved. So we will, again, the due date for that is 2025, so we'll need progress reports every 5 years after that until the plan is fully implemented and the standard is met. This is going to kind of reflect any changes. So the decarbonization plan needs to be amended every 5 years when changes are made. Form J, K, B, C, D, we talked about all of those. So Form D and F, as noted, are not always applicable. Next slide. Completion reporting. So based on the timeline identified in the decarbonization plan, you'll have a date of final completion. That's going to include measurement verification for the Clean Building Performance Standard performance metric, whether that's the meeting the EUIT or the investment criteria. Now, exempt buildings, let's going to make sure we got to consider that. Refer to Annex Y 6.7 and Z 6.7 for the specifics of exempt buildings. But if there is an exempt building on the campus, there are avenues for applying for exemption for those buildings specifically. You will need to meter them out of the energy use intensity target if that's the performance metric you're pursuing. There are no exemptions for campuses as a whole, for state campuses. Again, it's only those state campuses, 5 buildings or more with an aggregate of 100,000 square feet or more that are required. Private can opt in if there are 3 buildings or more over 100,000 square feet aggregate. You're still gonna need to meet either the EYT if you're or the investment criteria. These are the associated forms with each. Again, the EMP and O&M are still required. You can have one EMP and O&M for the whole campus. Next slide. Okay, just more timeline stuff. This is all kind of repetitive, but we want to hammer it in here. Again, this slideshow will be emailed to you, so you'll have a copy of this that you can refer to in the future. These are just good slides to kind of represent everything we've talked about in different ways. You may it may connect a little more, seeing it in different formats. But this is all stuff we've already covered today. Okay. So before jumping into the proposed language, Donnie, are there any questions?
No new questions right now. Thanks.
Okay. All right. So what I'm going to do is share my screen again. And we're going to show you what efforts we've made since the last workshop in developing the actual proposed language for the decarbonization plan within the context of the Clean Building Performance Standard. So can I get a shout out if you can see my screen?
I can see your
Can see it.
screen.
Okay, thank you. So same kind of format as all our workshops. You'll note that we have different font colors based on existing language. So we've got black font is ASHRAE standard 100. So it's from the original language of ASHRAE 100, which is our base standard. The blue font are from WAC 19450. And the red font are the changes we've made for 1390. I'll make a few other comments about the formatting because it varies a little bit. Okay. Again, black font from the original ASHRAE 100. Blue is from WAC, so our state amendments. What I have here in comment is when it's highlighted, it means it's something, it's a comment and that is new to this workshop. We haven't covered this comment before. I have left in comments from the previous workshop. So those that were not at the previous workshop will get that information as well. Just noting that this is new language that is contained within Annex W, but we moved it into the scope as well. Clarity. So this just talks about the decarbonization plan and the allowance for it. Allowance and the requirements for state buildings. Again, we have some definitions that changed or were added due to House Bill 1390. These are all comments and changes that were presented before. We have a comment or a new definition based on Seattle's Office of Sustainability Environment Building Emissions Performance Standard that was proposed in our last workshop as well. Existing requirements in our standard. So these are in blue, the amendments to standard 100. No changes until you start seeing the track changes here. We have kind of cleaned up some of the language from our last workshop. Instead of saying things like pursuing compliance through the decarbonization plan pathway, we're we're just saying participating campuses. So Judy did a nice job kind of cleaning that up. And I have a tendency to make word salad out of things, and Judy does a good job cleaning that up. Some of this was instigated by comments from you folks as well, so thank you for your contribution. I'm not going to really go over requirements that we've already stated in the past. We're going to focus on the new proposals for this workshop. We have made a change to call Form A Form J. Again, Form J is essentially Form A with a campus level focus. Or Form J references, we are using participating campuses throughout. Not identifying every time we changed it, you'll get the drift, I'm sure. And we're just showing sections of the existing standard that we're amending for 1390. So you'll see a lot of these sections, but not all. Little wordsmithing here for clarity. Heating plant energy shall be measured at the input to the heating plant. Again, that allows you to gain credit for the improved efficiency of the heating plant when developing your energy use intensity target or energy use intensity for the campus. Or clarity on developing the energy use intensity targets at the campus level. That's left over from last workshop, nothing new. Again, you get a copy of this as well, so you'll have an opportunity to take a close look at these proposed amendments.
I also posted a link in the chat.
Thank you, Judy. Again, we changed some terms in order to save some confusion and to conform with the new definitions in section 3. So instead of continually calling it campus district heating and or cooling, we're just calling it campus district energy system. I know, yeah, okay, so moving down into Annex W. So this is the new annex that specifically covers the decarbonization requirements. And so the general requirements as well as reporting requirements. Last workshop, we spoke mainly or primarily on the general requirements. We've been speaking today about both the general requirements and reporting requirements. So I'm going to kind of draw out those requirements that we spoke about in this slideshow. We have moved this section up above. There's no change in content. It's just kind of integrated into section W1.1. So again, all of this information we've The content is same as it was prior with some revisions in order to add clarity. Last workshop. Talking about the specific requirements of the decarbonization plan. Again, Form K that we reviewed, the outline for, goes into detail of all these requirements. We'll also be creating a guidance document surrounding the specific requirements of the decarbonization plan. So, real changes here from the last workshop. Again, we're made some changes that we're wordsmithing, such as using participating campuses. Seen a lot of this in our slideshow today already. Just kind of walking you through this so that when you have an opportunity to review these proposals, you'll have a better idea of recognizing what it is and what it means, where it is, excuse me. We talked about the compliance schedule, so beginning in 2024, final plan by 2025, progress reporting every 5 years after that, and then completion reporting. All details are in these sections. So what you're seeing here is all new content, not previously presented in workshop, but presented to you in some format in our slideshow. Progress reporting, details, exempt buildings. And then we have here some specific reporting requirements when you've reached completion of implementation of the decarbonization plan. So it looks very similar. You may recognize it. It's very similar to the requirements of Annex Z or Annex Y for Tier 1 or Tier 2 clean buildings compliance. We talked about these forms today. We've talked about the implementation process of the Energy Management Plan and Operations and Maintenance Program. The associated schedules for implementation of those. And at the final completion reporting, we want to see that the energy management plan and operations and maintenance programs have been amended in order to accommodate the new district energy system and any changes that were made to the campus in order to accommodate the new system, the heating plant. There are some situations where you might find that implementing an energy management plan or operations and maintenance program on specific buildings or systems that are going to become obsolete within implementation of the decarbonization plan. We're going to leave it to the qualified person to make the judgment of whether those energy management plan and operations and maintenance program provisions really need to apply to equipment and systems that, again, are going to be obsolete with the implementation of the decarbonization plan. But by final compliance reporting, we want to see that the EMP and O&M would cover all buildings on the campus appropriately for the systems that exist at that time. All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen on Lynn. Well, actually, before I do that, are there any questions, Donnie, that I can handle that might be?
Yeah, there's a few questions. We can start here. So for the 2024 submission, I'm assuming this is that 2025. How would you like us to account for new buildings under construction or planned that won't come online until 25, 26, 27, et cetera? Are they part of the model for the EUIT, or do they get added later at the 5-year update?
Well, you know, if in 2024, which is coming up in a few months, right? We understand if you have buildings in your plan that are going to be connected to this district system, it's best to notify us then so that we can get our data portal to include all these buildings that are either connected to the system now or will be over the next, the span of that decarbonization plan. Now, if within the 5-year progress reporting timelines, that plan changes and that building never gets built, or maybe the square footage changes, then you can update the files at that time through that process. But at minimum, come 2024, here in a few months, we want to know what your existing system is, what the existing buildings are. When the decarb plan is due in 2025, add those buildings that are planned to be part of the system over the lifespan of that decarbonization work.
Great, thank you. Next one on a similar kind of note with the portal regarding commerce building IDs, will we have them for buildings less than 20,000 square feet that are tied to the district energy system?
I think I'm not sure at this point whether we're going to create individual building IDs as we do for tier 1 and tier 2 buildings, but we will need to have them identified within the portal. So when we have that smart sheet format ready for you to report that information, and we'll certainly have a line item for those buildings that are not tier 1 or tier 2. We will understand that they won't have a building ID associated with them. We might assign a building ID with them. I'm not too sure yet. We'll have to talk to our data development folks or portal development folks.
All right. One more. We got regarding emergency use of backup fossil fuels. If it only gets used once every 3 or 5 years, does the average use per 5 years count towards the campus EUI performance? Or is it just one bad year? And that bad year can't exceed the 10% provisions of fossil fuel use.
The 10% should be on the annual, on an annual basis. So if that heating plant, the district heating plant, it should be designed so that it's not projected to use more than 10% of its backup or supplemental fossil fuels or electric resistant systems. That doesn't mean you can't have electric resistant or fossil fuel systems in the buildings themselves, but the district heating plant needs to be decarbonized and it can't use more than that 10%. And weather normalization does apply. So that'll be all factored into the Form C Energy Star Portfolio Manager record of energy use intensity. Realistically, yeah, you know, I mean, there could be a natural disaster or something that's beyond weather dependent heating energy use that we can't anticipate, you know, acts of God, as they would say. There are no specific provisions within the rules for that. There is no 5-year averaging of that. What we really want to see here is to meet the intent of the standard is decarbonizing that district heating system. So there may be circumstances where you may be above 10%, but that would take an extreme event in order to happen. So the design should account for normal interruptions in that primary system's operation.
Great, thanks. That's it for now.
Okay, I can stop sharing my screen on Lynn.
All righty, I'll take over. Do you see the proposed language?
It's,
the
I'm
slides.
seeing the slides on the left too, though.
I'm sorry,
Uh,
are you seeing this? What are you seeing? Are you seeing proposed language or are you seeing,
We're seeing the slideshow, but
is it with the,
That's
no,
the
yeah,
next slide.
there we go.
okay, thank you. Okay, thanks, Luke. I'm just gonna talk, in our previous workshop, a few people requested case studies on decarbonizing district energy systems. I'm just gonna go over a few of those, direct you to some and where you can find more. And I would like to share a couple of resources that I learned since our last workshop. So a couple of weeks ago, myself and a few members of the team attended an International District Energy Association conference in San Francisco, and we met with people who owned and operated district energy systems and others that operate and provide technology and services to district energy systems. So if you visit their website, they actually have a directory of a few district energy systems throughout the nation. And if you click on the link in a map, it shows their best practices, a list of case studies and experts in the field. And then another one I'd like to share for resources is the U.S. Department of Energy's Better Climate Challenge, which offers pretty much organizations to join a network of other organizations to try to reduce who are trying to reduce greenhouse gas emission and decarbonize as well. So by joining, you'll be DOE will provide technical assistance and an opportunity to share and learn other actionable best practices. So these are a few that I'd like to just point out. Wake Forest. This is from the ideas page. It's a case study of Wake Forest and their best practices. And then the University of California and the University of Colorado. And all of these, what they have in common is each case study talks about decarbonization, district energy, and EOI reduction. And just time for any more new new questions out there. I will, hopefully I can have more resources and more case studies to point out in our next workshop. Donnie, do we have any more questions?
No new questions at this time.
Okay, great. We'll go ahead and proceed. So like, as Luke said, we presented a lot of content today. There's the slides, the proposed rules, Form K. Please provide comments. There's different ways you could provide comments using, you can use the comment form, which is an option to attach the document. You can mark up the proposed documents, or you could simply fill out the form and write it into the box. You could also submit it by emailing us. Just be sure to enter in the subject line, House Bill 1390 comments, or you can wait until our public hearing and provide a verbal testimony. And then Judy, if you could put the comment form again in the chat. And then as Liz and Emily mentioned earlier, we have another workshop. It's going to be on March 21st. That's a Thursday from 10 a.m. to 12. The registration should be in the link. This is a new addition. We hope you could join us one more time just before we try to finalize these proposed rules, and we'll do a cumulative review as well. And once again, I just want to thank you for your time, your attention, and we appreciate your involvement in House Bill 1390 rulemaking. Have a great day.